Hello, everyone. This is Keith Stone with the Center for Hellenic Studies, and I'm here again with Greg Nagy and Sarah and Janet and Elen for Office Hours of HeroesX version 11. And we're talking this week about hours 9 and 10. And I'll read the questions first, as I do. For hour 9, when I was a PhD student at Harvard, and this is Greg talking,
Yes.
writing the question, so many years ago, I once heard something most striking from my old teacher, John H. Finley, who was a stellar professor of ancient Greek literature. Odysseus, he said in one of his lectures, gets a good press only in the Odyssey. Well, he was certainly right in implying that Odysseus gets a bad press in ancient Greek traditions situated outside our Odyssey. That is to say, he is an incorrigible trickster, as anthropologists would say it, and he tends to violate social norms. Perhaps he can violate even moral norms. I cannot disagree with such formulations. But my question here is heading in a different direction. Can we say that Odysseus gets bad press even in our Odyssey? And quickly, the hour 10 question, again in the voice of Greg. I have thought for a long time that the story of the land of the Lotus-Eaters in Odyssey 9, verses 82 through 104, gives us a good way to understand the symbolism that we find embedded inside the Homeric Odyssey. But maybe I'm oversimplifying. Feel free to agree or disagree. But back to the bad press of Odysseus.
Yes.
Does he get bad press in the Odyssey?
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Well, one participant noted that right at the beginning of the Odyssey, Telemachus wishes that his father had died in Troy because, then he would have had a tomb and, fame for himself and his son. And, now the winds have seized him and he's nameless and unknown. I think that's a line from the Odyssey. So even at the beginning, his own son, is wandering.
Yes, yes, yes.
Hmm.
It's a very good observation from that participant. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sound like a good story. And can I just say that so many people dislike Achilles because they say, oh, he's sitting it out, he is sulking. I hate the word sulk. But in the end, he has the reputation of having saved the Achaeans. Okay, not directly in the Iliad, only indirectly by way of Patroclus. But in the end, when all is said and done, Achilles is one of the saviors of the Achaeans in the sense that people worship him even at Troy. Compare that with Odysseus, who's trying to make a homecoming with his companions, and by the time he gets home to Ithaca, he's the only survivor. And we have that modern or modernist term, survivor's guilt. Shouldn't he feel guilty that he's the only one to survive? And when you look at all the people who followed him to Troy, and then he comes back to Ithaca, and he's the only survivor.
Another participant pointed out Rhapsody 8, lines 75 to 82, Dematochus' song, and quarrel between Achilles and Odysseus.
Yes.
Here, Odysseus is arguing best of the Achaeans. We don't know why they are arguing, but showing some opposition, some negativity.
Yes, and that too does not put Odysseus in a good light. And the fact that he reacts to that scene by weeping suggests that it's not a good story. It's bad press. But then, frankly, the parts that really get me about bad press is how he violates protocols. And sometimes it's just protocols of how to dine properly. So I'm fascinated with that scene where at the feast of Alkinoos in Odyssey 8, he starts carving the roasted meat, or let's say, I shouldn't say it that way, the cooked meat. as if he were the host. Well, he's not the host, he's the guest. He has no business carving meat for the people who are dining at the dining hall of Alcinous. But of course, the worst example of them all is in Iliad 9, where if Achilles had accepted the deal that Agamemnon is offering to Achilles via Odysseus, if Achilles accepts that deal, he would be aborting his own epic reputation, because Agamemnon himself says, you remember in Iliad 9, if Achilles accepts, that will show that I am superior to Achilles. I, Agamemnon, am superior to Achilles. So, of course, Odysseus doesn't mention that part of the Agamemnon message, but somehow Achilles sees through it. And again, this does not put Odysseus in a good light at all.
Can I ask you a bit further about that then, Greg? Because there's one of the participants has mentioned all the acts of trickery and the lying, and in fact, two of them have picked up on the lying, and so often he is, how shall we put it, economical with the truth at best, and at worst, just complete out and out lies.
Yes, yes.
Does that, though, always put him in a bad press, I'm wondering? Because sometimes he has to be quite skilled in omitting things when he's talking to people, like with the account of when he talks to Alcinous about Nausicaa. He omits some of the details not to put her in a bad light.
Yes, it's true. I would say, dear Sarah, that some of these lies are not necessarily a sign of disapproval by the narrator, and that's because, in a sense, our word "lie" is too much of a broad brushstroke. I could be an apologist for Odysseus by saying that he has to be a survivor. In order to be a survivor, he has to encode the truth in what he says, and that means that those who are morally deficient will not understand what he says and misunderstand and misinterpret and act accordingly, whereas in those who do understand the inner truth, the inner core of what he's saying, that is still a moral message in the sense that he is the rightful king. Odysseus is the rightful king of Ithaca.
So that's what you, the Greek word, I think, is ainos, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's something we've been looking at. So how can we tell if any of those untruths are ones that do give him a bad press? How can we be morally aware enough to distinguish them?
Well, the nice thing is that it's just as with everything in the older phases of ainos, the medium does not spell out, may I put it this way, the moral of the story. You know, we have Aesop's fables, and in the classical version, each fable has at the end a moral of the story. So this is what we learn. But in older forms of the ainos, the moral of the story is not spelled out. You're supposed to get it, and if you don't get it, well, that shows you're not you're not intellectually, morally, and emotionally qualified to understand. And so it's very anxiety making. You know how I love to say to people who read the Iliad and the Odyssey, and they'll be talking about, well, on a scale of 0 to 10, I rate the Iliad 6, and then I rate the Odyssey 7, or maybe 4, or whatever. And I say to myself, this isn't Consumers Reports. This is a situation where we're not the ones who are supposed to judge what's happening in Homeric poetry, especially with the ainos that is encoded. It's the medium that's judging us. Are we intellectual enough? Are we moral enough? Are we emotionally well enough put together to get it? And if we don't, then it's our fault.
Gee, thanks.
Sounds like there's no answer key.
So I'm sorry. I think it's a very humbling thing, and so often I catch myself being, shall we say, defective as a reader, and so I'm saying, today the Odyssey has judged me to be number 7. Maybe I can be number 8 tomorrow.
One of the participants mentioned Polyphemus, and I was thinking, okay, Odysseus blinded him, but then his name is not about seeing, but it's about utterances, many utterances.
Yes.
And maybe they're also understanding these utterances may come to picture.
I think it's a typical kind of thing for traditions of storytelling about tricksters in general, that the trickster's enemy usually has the same characteristics as the trickster. It's just that one of them will win because somehow there's still something positive in the trickster, whereas the monster who is the opponent will lose. And one of my favorite examples is Hermes, who is the ultimate, how shall I say, a trickster god, and his monster opponent is Argos, who has countless number of eyes. So in a sense, the monster is hermetic, just as Hermes is hermetic, but the monster is the negative side, and Hermes is the positive side. Similarly, Polyphemus is duped by Odysseus. And I confess, I admit that Polyphemus, it doesn't seem very intelligent, but we do know of other traditions of the Odyssey where the Cyclopes are actually very intelligent. They're great sailors. In one version of the Odyssey, we know from the notes from the ancient world about the Odyssey, the Cyclopes, that's the plural of Cyclops, were so smart and such good sailors that they chased Odysseus all over the Mediterranean world. So he was lucky to escape. And so there's so many variations on the theme when it comes to the opponent of the trickster. And could I bring up this wonderful book by Paul Radin, R-A-D-I-N, who I think he was an American, really, so he preferred, I'm sorry about this, Hélène, the American pronunciation, Paul Radin. And his book, which is called The Trickster, has a beautiful appendix about Winnebago narrative traditions about tricksters. And what I like about this tradition, and it's in the appendix of Radin's book, is that first there's a narrative of X number of things that the trickster does wrongly, whether it's moral or whether it has to do with etiquette, whatever. And then after the narrative goes through items A through Z, then the trickster himself takes off his mask, so to speak, as the character and becomes the narrator, and then proceeds to say what went wrong from A to Z. So he then becomes a culture hero who teaches us how to avoid all those bad things that he has just finished doing in the narrative. So this is a culture hero, Odysseus, who teaches even when he does things wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yes. There's even more about Polyphemus. One participant draws a parallel between the blinding of Polyphemus and the disappearance of Odysseus for 10 years. and is wondering, you know, Polyphemus cannot see, and Odysseus has disappeared. So is there, you know, some...
Really? You know, we should encourage that participant to write that down. That's so original. Wow.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, because vision in archaic Greek thinking is always a two-way street. It's reciprocal. We don't see that very much. One trace of it in English is the English word look, where looking can involve looking at the target vision, or it can be you as the target. If I look terrible today, that means I'm the target of vision. But I look at somebody else, then somebody else is the target of vision, or something else is the target of vision. So look is the perfect example of where even in English, we still have this old pattern in Indo-European languages of the reciprocity of vision, of the two-way street nature of vision. So that's why I like this participant's formulation. If I blind the monster, that means I'm become invisible.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But then if I stay invisible, I won't get my clears. So, you know.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should go to the other question, because I have to disappear, speaking of invisible, in 5 minutes.
Okay, Land of the Lotus-Eaters. Is this a good way to understand the symbolism that we find embedded in the Odyssey? What did folks have to say here?
Quickly, out of sight, out of mind.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes, yes.
I do remember one remark that someone made was that they couldn't even themselves keep track of all the various episodes in Odysseus's wanderings, you know, back from Troy to home.
Yeah.
I think that's a great symbol of what Odysseus is going through himself.
I used to think, if you don't have nous, you don't have nostos.
Mm.
So maybe I'm being too simple-minded, but it's such a beautiful compression of the whole story. You can tell that story, and that could be the Odyssey.
What about the name itself of the Lotus-Eaters? And then the word in Greek about forgetting, leto, or yeah. So is there was it a kind of pun in the Odyssey, or is it?
I'm not sure. I see what you're saying. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and yes, I'm not either.
Yeah.
There's also a point and sort of question about the idea of immortality, but he doesn't accept the immortality as a gift from Calypso. So he hasn't at that stage, I guess, quite forgotten that he wants to return home. We see him on a promontory, kind of looking out to sea and thinking about returning, but he's very stuck, the same way you would be if you, as you would be on the Lotus-Eaters. And can I also ask about Circe's Island, because he does sort of, well, they hang about there for about a year, and it's his men who have to remind him, hold on, aren't we supposed to be going home? It's nice here, but...
He's so selfish, True.
So there's that sort of double-edged, you know, do I stay, do I go, and trying to find a balance. Is that part of that?
I think it is. I think it is. You know, one way to answer my own conundrum of a question is to say that maybe the only thing that tips Odysseus into the positive, as opposed to the negative aspects of tricksterism, is that it is the companion piece of the Iliad. If you hang out with the Iliad, you as the Odyssey have to be positive. It's not, that's, you know, I'll disown that formulation practically as soon as I've said it, but anyway.
Mhm.
People say that about the Mahabharata, that the Ramayana wouldn't be the Ramayana if it weren't the twin of the Mahabharata in Indic epic traditions. But I can only play with this to some degree. I don't want to own these formulas.
Well, then, before anyone gets too attached, or Sarah, were you going to add another?
Well, no, I was just picking up on that thought about the duality, and again, this is something that I think our participants are noticing, all sorts of contrasts in all sorts of places.
Yes, yes.
Not just between Iliad and Odyssey, but between various situations. So is that something that's useful to think with in terms of Odysseus and the episode?
Very. I think that's a lovely way to bring this to a close, because I think that gives us a higher comfort level. Yes.
All right. Well, you four, thanks for joining me. And all of you out there, thanks for joining us.
Okay.
Until next time.
Bye.